Back before World War II, Alexander the Great and Napoleon tried to invade Russia. And it wasn't the soldiers or the drunken outbursts that kept them from winning. It was the Russian winter. The winter that froze soldiers to death. The winter that caused even the best soldiers to break. It was the winter that killed everyone. Winter comes early every 4 years in Russia because of how the Earth's axis rotates. And 1942 was no exception. Now, I'm going to talk to you about a small town that helped change the course of human history called Stalingrad. And with the help of some rats, probably changed the course of World War II. At the beginning of World War II, Stalin and Hitler had a pact not to attack each other. Hitler then broke that pact and attacked Russia, which prompted Stalin to say something along the lines of, "This rat can't keep his words. This rat is a dirty game player." Now, Stalin had a few million troops, and so did Hitler. But his troops were much more ill-equipped. They had only a year of training, while Hitler's had 2 to 3 to 4 or 5, upwards to about 8 years of training at the most. So they were obviously better suited for combat. And up until this point, Hitler had been taking places at only days at a time. Like Poland, 28 days to take the entire country of Poland. After that, 36 days to take Paris. 10 days later, the rest of France fell. He had been taking countrysides just by the sheer fear of his numbers and the fear in which he has bestowed upon everyone underneath him. But the Russians, as we all know, are not going to give up without a fight. And this is very promptu in Stalingrad. 100 miles away, Hitler's army waited. They waited between 2 places. They waited for an oil refinery, and they waited near Stalingrad. Hitler had a choice. They were both 100 miles away. He could either attack the oil refinery, which he needed for his tanks, or he could attack Stalingrad. Chris, I know you're going to rule the world one day, so I'm going to give you a little bit of advice. If you ever have the option to attack a city, go with the one that you need, not the one that you want to attack. Because that's what Hitler did. He attacked Stalingrad not because it had any advantage, none advantage whatsoever. He attacked it because of its name. That is true. He attacked it because of his name just because he wanted to show the German people, oh, we are going to take this place and then burn it to the ground. I know, I have a French accent, but he does. But that's what he wanted, and he put in charge a general who was not well suited for the job. The general was named Paulus, and Paulus had already served underneath Rommel, who was in the desert in Africa, and had failed every single time he was put in power. But Hitler, quote unquote, saw something in him. And he thought that maybe this was the man who was going to take Stalingrad for him. So I'm going to pass around a little better map than what I've written down. Let me just show it around. Now, Paulus had about 500,000 troops at his disposal, and about 2,000 Panzer tanks, along with another 1,000 half-tracks. He had enough to take everything. So he came in from the southern side. I've turned it so it's easier to see. And the Germans have a favorite tactic of advantage. They like to do the pincer maneuver. And the pincer maneuver is where you come around from both sides and encircle your enemy so that they have no escape and you can just whittle them down until they're gone. This is his favorite method for a much harsher enemy like the Russians. Unfortunately, he can't do the pincer maneuver because of the river. You can't come around from a river, especially when the river over here has a weapons factory. Okay? They had gigantic artillery and a whole air force over there, but Hitler still went for it. Now, this was 1942, and they still had the big advantage. No one had beaten the Germans really hard to get. And again, he'd been taking these days at a time. The first day of attack, Chekhov, who was a brand new, cruel general for the Russians, let him take the entire countryside. He just let him have it. He let the German have all of that. Because he knew that he could not beat him with his tanks or with his men. It was just going to be a futile battle. They were going to win with their panzer tanks. And because they couldn't outmaneuver them over there either. So the day before the Germans then attacked the city, they bombed it with over 60,000 bombs and destroyed over 40,000 civilian houses. Now this is a big deal because Stalin had the choice to remove the civilians from Stalingrad, but he said no, you're going to leave the civilians there, because not only did he want the soldiers to fight for themselves, he wanted the soldiers to fight and look over and be able to see women and children right there and say, my life has got to go for these people to save them. It may be harsh, but it has a logical conclusion, which is your soldiers are going to fight a lot harder. Now that may seem cruel, but these guys, they were determined to win. So Chekhov wanted to do anything to make that happen. So he let them take the farmland. When they bombed Stalingrad, something unexpected from the Germans happened. When they did this, all the rubble from the buildings filled up all the streets. Therefore, when they moved their tanks in, they then became stuck in their own rubble, prompting the Russians that were much more agile and knew the city to throw grenades and destroy the tanks much more easily. Plus, the tanks were built for artillery, so they couldn't go up super high. And when you do, there's just a building there. There's nothing to hit. So the Germans had a very disadvantage at this point. Now, winter came early this year. It came in November instead of the regular October. At this point, 1/4 of the Russians had died, which is about 25% of a million. So a lot of Russians had already died because he wanted the Germans to think they were winning. But instead he was winning their time. They had already been fighting for 1 month, which Hitler was already upset about, and kept sending call lists. It's kind of like kids in the backseat. Are you there yet? Are you there yet? Are you there yet? No. But that's what Hitler kept sending them telegrams. Paulus then took half the city, which Chekhov led him. He removed all his troops from the western side, so all this was Paulus's, along with the western. What Paulus didn't know, and what everyone else did, is that Chekhov began to raise his army, not here, not around here, but up in here, and here. See, you can't do the pincer maneuver against the river, but Chekhov can do a pincer maneuver on you. He was going to encircle them, which started on November 19th, the same day that the snow started. The snow came down, and at its lowest point was negative 30 degrees. It was so cold that the oil and the guns froze when you could not fire them. The Russians had a way around this. They added gasoline to theirs, and it was able to fire. And the Germans only had the opportunity to run. So I'm just going to pass out a few pictures of actual pictures from Stalingrad. And pass them down each row. Now, something else that the Germans did not account for. Females who were in the city had seen how the males had been fighting, and then decided that they could do that. That's easy enough. So the Russian women, there was a big group of them in one building at one point. And the Germans came in with their machine guns and then laid them down because they're like, oh, these are just women. We'll just take them prisoner, do whatever. Because these Germans were going to rape all these women.
He's using the Thompson.
The German women, or the Russian women that said, oh, is that how it's going to be? Picked up the Germans' weapons and took them all out. I don't know what you think of bad... Yeah, these people are awesome, okay? I don't know what you think awesome looks like, but that's awesome. Chekhov then found out something very strange. He started doing really crude experiments, but he found out that females, during the wintertime, had a much stabler grip. and made half of his snipers into females because they were able to take them down. Now, negative 30 degrees, I don't know if you know this, but frostbite set in, and Germans were wearing metal helmets.
Oh.
They had to take off their helmets because of how cold it was, and that made it a playground for snipers, taking them all down. At one point, there was a Russian and German snipers were everywhere throughout the city. Sometimes so much that a German sniper and a Russian sniper would be in the same building, looking two different directions, shooting two different soldiers, but they would pass each other in the stairway and not say anything. Because they didn't want to fight the dirty war that everyone else was fighting with hatchets, flamethrowers, and pure bare fists. That's what the war turned into, especially when you can't use your guns. Now, by December, Chekhov finally put his plan into fruition. And there were German tanks guarding, about 2,000 German tanks guarding the perimeter.